It was supposed to be an ordinary morning, one of those quiet starts that almost feel like a small blessing before a long workday. Captain Alina Ramirez stepped out of her apartment just as the sun was climbing above the rooftops, painting the street a soft gold. She wasn't in uniform today. She had planned to stop by the cafe near the station to grab her favorite tea before heading in for a meeting. Dressed in jeans, a light jacket, and sneakers, she looked like any other person heading out to begin the day. The neighborhood was calm, with only a few people moving around, an older man sweeping the front of his store, a couple walking a dog, someone waiting for a bus. Alina liked these moments because they felt peaceful and human, far from the tense situations she often had to handle at work. She took a slow breath, letting the warmth of the morning settle into her chest as she walked toward the cafe. She reminded herself to enjoy the small things: the soft breeze, the smell of fresh bread drifting from a bakery, the easy quiet that came before the busy hours. She tried not to think about the long agenda waiting for her at the precinct. Her team had been working hard on a community safety initiative, and today they were set to finalize new plans. It was important work, but Alina knew that once she stepped into the station, the calm she enjoyed now would disappear. The cafe was already half full when she arrived. People chatted softly at the tables, tapping on laptops or reading the morning news. The place was warm and smelled sweet. The sound of cups clinking against saucers blended pleasantly with the music playing overhead. Alina liked this cafe because it always felt welcoming. The workers knew her by face, even if she tried to come in quietly. They greeted everyone with the same kind smile. Alina ordered her drink, thanked the barista, and took a seat by the window. She pulled out her phone to check messages as nothing urgent. She took a sip of her tea and looked out at the street. The world moved gently. She felt grounded, as if everything was exactly where it needed to be. But a few blocks away, two officers were heading toward that same cafe with an entirely different energy. Their morning had been anything but calm. They were new to the force, still adjusting to the rhythm of real police work, and both carried that mix of excitement and nerves that came with wanting to prove themselves. They had just received a call about a woman suspected of using stolen credit information at a nearby store. The caller had given a brief description: medium height, dark hair, casual clothing. The suspect had left the store quickly and was last seen walking in the direction of the cafe. The rookies acted fast, maybe a little too fast, which often happened when adrenaline mixed with inexperience. Both officers hurried down the sidewalk, scanning every person in sight, trying to match the vague description they had been given. They didn't stop to ask more questions or gather more details. They didn't pause to consider how many people in the neighborhood fit such a general description. In their minds, they were responding to a crime in progress, and they needed to move quickly. When they looked through the cafe windows and saw Alina sitting alone with her phone, their eyes widened slightly. She matched the description well enough that they didn't hesitate. They didn't notice her calm posture or the relaxed way she sipped her tea. They didn't recognize her face, even though her photo hung in the hallway of their own precinct, framed among other department leaders. In their rush to act, they saw her only as a possible suspect. Inside the cafe, Alina had no idea anything unusual was happening. She glanced at her watch, thinking she might stay for a few more minutes. She enjoyed watching people come and go, imagining where they were headed, what kind of day they might be having. It made her feel connected to the community she had promised to protect. As she sat there, the two rookies pushed through the cafe doors, scanning the room. Their eyes landed on her instantly. Alina noticed their uniforms but didn't think much of it at first. Officers stopped into the cafe often. Some were on breaks, some picking up breakfast before their shifts. Still, something about the way these two stood made her lift her head slightly. Their posture was stiff, urgent. The officers exchanged a quick glance with each other and started walking straight toward her table. Alina's eyes followed them with mild curiosity, wondering if they were looking for someone. She didn't expect that someone to be her. When they reached her table, one of the officers spoke in a firm but shaky tone. "Ma'am, we need to see your identification." Alina blinked, surprised. "Is something wrong?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. The second officer stepped in, sounding more insistent than confident. "We just need to see your ID right now, please." Alina looked at them carefully, sensing tension rolling off them. Their shoulders were tight, their expressions serious. She felt a small shift of concern. She had been in policing long enough to know when someone was acting under pressure. "All right," she said gently. "I'm happy to cooperate. May I ask what this is about?" The first officer didn't answer her question. Instead, he said, "Please stand up and keep your hands where we can see them." A ripple of silence spread across the cafe. People paused mid-conversation. A few turned in their seats. The barista behind the counter froze, holding a cup halfway to the machine. Alina kept her voice steady. "Officers, I'm not resisting. I just want to understand the situation. If you check my badge and my bag, this will all make sense." But the rookies were too wound up to process her words. They interpreted her calm tone as avoidance. They mistook her steady posture for defiance. Their minds were locked onto the idea that they had found their suspect. The second officer reached for her arm, trying to move her upright. Alina allowed herself to rise, but gently pulled back just enough to signal that this wasn't the right approach. "Please," she said softly. "Listen to me for just a moment." Her tone wasn't sharp or angry. It was patient, almost guiding. But the rookies were caught in the momentum of the moment. They felt eyes on them. They felt pressure to act decisively. Their training had taught them to stay alert, but experience had not yet taught them the importance of slowing down. One of the customers nearby gasped softly. Someone whispered to a friend. The air felt heavy, uncomfortable. Alina could feel the situation stretching. It was thin and brittle, like something that might snap if not handled carefully. She knew she had to tread lightly. She couldn't reveal her authority too forcefully. It might embarrass the officers in a way that would only make things worse. And she couldn't escalate by reacting too strongly. In moments like these, dignity and patience were the strongest tools she had. "Everything is okay," she said, her voice low and even. "Let's take this one step at a time. My identification is in my bag, just beside my chair." The rookies hesitated, unsure. They exchanged another glance. One of them reached toward the bag but stopped, looking uncertain. Their confidence was starting to waver. Doubt flickered across their faces. But they still didn't fully step out of the mistake they were making. People in the cafe waited, trapped somewhere between concern and curiosity. Alina stood calmly, her expression steady, her hands visible, her posture relaxed, not because she felt no stress, but because she knew calmness had the power to steady others. Outside, the sunlight still warmed the street. The morning still looked peaceful through the window. But inside, two young officers had no idea they were moments away from realizing just how wrong they were, and how close they had come to crossing a line they would remember. For a very long time, the moment seemed to stretch longer than it should have, like time itself was holding its breath. Captain Alina Ramirez stood calmly, her hands visible, her posture steady, while the two young officers in front of her tried to hold on to the idea that they were doing the right thing. Their nerves were written all over their faces. Even someone with no experience in police work could have sensed their tension. But Alina understood it even more deeply. She had seen this kind of pressure before, mostly in rookies who were eager to handle every call perfectly. They worried about making mistakes, but sometimes rushed straight into one without realizing it. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere changed. The warm morning chatter had vanished. People were watching from their tables, whispering among themselves, trying to figure out what was happening. Some looked confused, some concerned. Even the workers behind the counter kept glancing over, unsure whether to step in or stay back. Alina could feel every eye on them. But she didn't let it change her expression. She breathed in quietly, letting her chest rise and fall slowly. Remaining calm wasn't just a choice, it was necessary. If she looked upset or defensive, the young officers would panic even more. One of the rookies spoke again, though his voice was a little less firm than before. "Ma'am, we're following instructions. We need you to step outside with us." He sounded unsure, as if even he wasn't convinced that was the right thing to do. His partner stood beside him, trying to look confident. But her fingers trembled slightly as she held onto her notepad. Alina softened her expression, hoping it would ease their nerves. "I understand you're trying to do your job," she said gently. "But before this goes any further, I need you to check my identification. It's right there in my bag. Please look at it." The officer closest to the bag took a step toward it, but paused again. Caught between the pressure of the moment and the small voice in his mind telling him something wasn't adding up. He hesitated long enough that it became clear he didn't know what the right thing to do was anymore, before any of them moved. A man who had been seated a few tables away slowly stood up. He had been watching the whole situation quietly. He wasn't loud or dramatic, but he looked familiar to Alana. She had seen him once at a community meeting where she spoke about safety programs. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, looking at the officers. "I don't want to interrupt, but that's Captain Ramirez." His voice wasn't raised, but the words hit the air like a sudden breeze. The rookies both froze. Their eyes widened just slightly, confusion spreading across their faces. The woman officer blinked. "Who?" the man repeated calmly. "Captain Alina Ramirez? She's with your department. She gave a talk at the community center last month." The cafe became even quieter than before. You could almost hear the worry of the coffee machine in the back. The rookies turned to look at Alina again, really looking this time, not at her clothes or the vague description they were given, but at her face. Alina didn't react with frustration, though she could have. Instead, she gave a small nod, as if to confirm what the man had said. "It's true," she said softly. "Please check my badge. It will explain everything." The young officers exchanged a look, one mixed with embarrassment, uncertainty, and dawning realization. Their shoulders sagged slightly under the weight of what they were starting to understand. Still, they proceeded cautiously. Not wanting to jump from one mistake into another, the male officer reached for the bag, opening it carefully. Inside, right at the top, was a leather badge case. He picked it up, opened it, and stared. His face drained of color. His partner stepped closer to look as well. They both stared for several seconds, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief. Then to the unmistakable look of someone who knows they've made a serious error. The woman officer swallowed hard and stepped back. "Captain," she whispered under her breath, even though she said it softly. The title carried weight. Alina could feel the room inhale sharply. People who had been whispering fell silent again, realizing the situation was something different than what they first thought. The rookies looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. The male officer held the badge with both hands, almost as if he thought he might drop it. We didn't know," he muttered, unable to look her in the eye. Alina nodded slowly. "I understand. But this is why I asked you to slow down." She didn't raise her voice or scold them. Her tone was calm, even gentle. But there was a firmness to it, the kind that carried lessons without needing anger. The woman officer stepped forward, stumbling over her words. "We're so sorry. We didn't recognize you. We were told the suspect came this way, and we thought..." Alina raised a hand slightly, not to silence her, but to ease her turmoil. "It's all right. Take a breath." The officer paused, breathing in shakily. Her hands still trembled slightly. It was clear she wasn't just embarrassed, she was shaken by the idea that she had nearly handcuffed someone above her rank. And in such a public setting, the man who recognized Alina quietly sat back down. Though he kept watching, ready to step in again if things escalated, but they wouldn't, not now. The cafe began to relax, bit by bit. People subtly turned back to their drinks and conversations, though many still glanced over curiously. The moment had shifted, but it hadn't fully settled yet. Alina looked at the rookies carefully. She didn't want them to feel crushed by the moment, but she couldn't ignore what had happened either. "Tell me," she said gently, "what description were you given?" The male officer cleared his throat and pulled out his notepad. "A woman with dark hair, casual clothes, medium height, seen leaving a store after using stolen card information." Alina nodded. "And how many people in this neighborhood fit that description on any given morning?" He looked down, clearly ashamed. "A lot." She didn't press further. Her point was already clear. The woman officer stepped forward again. We should have asked more questions, or at least verified properly. Yes, Alina said softly. You should have. Rushing can lead to mistakes, and mistakes can lead to harm. She kept her voice free of harshness because she remembered what it felt like to be new, when every decision felt huge and every error felt like a disaster. But she needed them to learn from this. Not through fear, but through understanding. The male officer fumbled with the badge case before handing it back to her. His hands were still shaking. We're sorry, Captain. Truly. Alina accepted the badge and placed it in her bag. I believe you, she said. But you need to take this moment seriously. The officer nodded quickly. We do. We will. Alina took another slow breath. She looked around the cafe at the worried faces, the uncomfortable silence. The workers behind the counter who didn't know what to say. She didn't like drawing attention, especially not in places meant for comfort. She wished the situation had gone differently. But she also knew moments like these could become powerful lessons. Let's step outside for a moment, she said calmly. We don't need an audience for the rest of this conversation. The rookies agreed instantly, grateful for a chance to move somewhere more private. They stepped back, giving her space to collect her things. Alina reached for her drink, now cooling on the table, and took a small sip before heading toward the door. As she walked past, a few customers gave her soft nods of support. One even whispered, "Hope you're okay." And Alina offered a grateful smile in return. When they reached the sidewalk, the morning sun warmed her face again. The street was busier now, with people heading to work or taking morning walks. No one outside knew what had just happened. The world moved on. Unaware of the tension still lingering in the air, Alina waited until the rookies stood in front of her, trying to gather themselves. Both looked embarrassed, but more than that, they looked disappointed in their own actions. I want you to understand something important, Alina began. Stopping someone based on a report is part of the job, but how you handle that stop matters. You have to stay open to the possibility that your first assumption might be wrong. They nodded quickly, listening closely. You also need to stay aware of the energy you bring into a situation. When you approach someone with fear or urgency, you can make the situation harder for everyone, including yourselves. The woman officer's voice wavered. We really are sorry, Captain. We were trying to do the right thing. I know, Alina replied gently. But next time, slow down. Ask questions. Look for details. Use your training, not just your adrenaline. The male officer exhaled shakily. We will. We learned a lot today. Alina nodded. Good. That's what matters. The rookies straightened up, still embarrassed but now clearer, grounded. They seemed grateful that she wasn't yelling, that she wasn't humiliating them. Instead, she was guiding them, offering the kind of leadership that helped people grow. I'm heading to the precinct now, Alina said. When you return, report everything that happened. Be honest about it. They both swallowed nervously but nodded. Yes, Captain. Alina gave them one last calm look before turning toward the station. She didn't rush. She didn't let the morning shake her. But she knew this moment wasn't over, not really. It would follow all three of them into the rest of the day, and it would shape how the rookies handled their roles in the future. As she walked down the street, the sun warming her back, Alina couldn't help but think about how close things had come to going very differently. And she hoped the rookies understood just how lucky they were that a moment fueled by pressure hadn't turned into something far worse. She hoped they carried the lesson with them. She hoped they learned what patience looked like, what calm leadership felt like, and how easily assumptions could cloud good judgment. Because the truth was simple. This incident would stay with them for a long time. And in the end, it might be the moment that saved them from making a bigger mistake later in their careers. The walk to the precinct was usually a short and peaceful one for Captain Alina Ramirez. But that morning it felt heavier, as if the air around her carried the weight of everything that had just happened. She tried to focus on the quiet rhythm of her footsteps, the gentle sounds of the city waking up, and the faint chatter of people starting their day. But her mind kept drifting back to the rookies' shaken faces and the silence inside the cafe. She was angry. She had experienced far worse misunderstandings in her career. But she couldn't stop thinking about how quickly a simple mistake could turn into a serious incident. The thought lingered with her as she crossed the intersection near the precinct, where familiar buildings and familiar faces usually brought a sense of comfort. When she stepped into the precinct lobby, the atmosphere hit her immediately, a mix of ringing phones, hurried conversations, and officers rushing to start their shifts. The front desk clerk, who had known her for years, greeted her warmly without noticing anything unusual. "Busy day ahead?" he asked. "Something like that," she replied with a small smile. She moved through the hall, passing bulletin boards filled with updates and announcements. Her badge still rested in her bag, a reminder of how close she had come to being handcuffed that morning. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because two young officers had let adrenaline override procedure. She reached her office and pushed the door open. It was neat and simple papers stacked on her desk, a framed certificate hanging on the wall, and a small potted plant that one of her team members had given her months ago. She placed her bag on the chair, sat down, and let out a slow breath. Just a few minutes later, a soft knock landed on her door. "Come in," she said. A familiar face stepped inside Sergeant Donovan, a calm and thoughtful leader known for understanding his officers far beyond paperwork or reports. He noticed immediately that something was off. "You look like you've had an interesting morning," he said gently. Alina nodded. "Interesting is one word for it. We may need to talk about two of our rookies. They made a mistake today. Nothing dangerous, but something that needs attention." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "That serious?" "Not serious in damage," Alina explained, "but serious in lesson. They misidentified me as a suspect and nearly detained me." The sergeant's eyes widened. He let out a slow whistle before shaking his head. "That's not ideal," no, Alina said softly. "But they weren't acting out of bad intentions. They were scared, pressured, and moving too quickly." She paused, then added, "They didn't even recognize me." Donovan let out a sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll call them in. Better we hear their side before deciding anything." Lena appreciated his balanced, steady approach. He wasn't the type to yell unless absolutely necessary. He believed in building strong officers, not breaking them down. As the sergeant left to bring in the rookies, Alina leaned back in her chair. She knew this meeting would be uncomfortable for everyone involved. But discomfort wasn't always bad sometimes. It was the thing that pushed people to grow. A few minutes passed before a soft knock sounded again. Donovan returned, followed by the two rookies. Their faces were tense, eyes fixed on the floor, shoulders drawn in like they were bracing for impact. "Close the door," Donovan said quietly. They obeyed, then stood awkwardly in front of Elena's desk. Neither knew where to put their hands or how to stand. Elena didn't rush to speak. She gave them a moment to settle, though they didn't seem capable of relaxing yet. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm. "I want to thank you both for coming in quickly. Let's talk about this morning. I want to hear your understanding of what happened." The male officer swallowed hard, then nodded. We got a call about a credit card fraud suspect who left a store nearby. The description matched. Well, it seemed to match you. We thought she had come into the cafe." Lena listened without interrupting. "We saw you sitting alone," he continued, and we thought his voice cracked slightly. "We thought we had the right person. We didn't slow down. We didn't check more details. We just acted." His partner took a shaky breath before adding, "We should have asked better questions. We should have verified properly. We were too ready to jump in." "We're sorry, Captain, truly." Lena looked at both of them carefully. Their regret wasn't forced. It wasn't the kind someone wore just to avoid trouble. It was real, the kind that settled deep in your chest and stayed there. She nodded gently. "I accept your apology. But we need to talk about why this happened and why it cannot happen again." The rookies both nodded quickly, almost desperately. Alina leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on the desk. "In this job, you will face pressure. You will get calls that sound urgent. You will have moments when your heart races. But you cannot let fear or adrenaline make decisions for you. If you do, You put yourselves and others at risk. The room stayed quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights. What happened this morning could have been worse, Alina continued. Not because of me. Knew how to stay calm. But what if it had been someone else? Someone who panicked? Someone who didn't understand how to respond? The rookies lowered their eyes, clearly imagining the possibilities. You approached with tension, she said softly. You didn't ask clear questions. You didn't consider how vague the description was. And when I tried to speak, you mistook calmness for resistance. That's not how we do this job. The woman officer's voice wavered. We know, we're sorry. We weren't thinking clearly. Alina softened her tone. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's not okay to let overwhelm guide your actions. Sergeant Donovan stepped in then, folding his arms. You two are new. Mistakes happen. But what matters is how you learn from them. In this one, you're going to learn from it for the rest of your careers. Both rookies nodded, still tense but grateful that no one was yelling. Alina took a moment, then spoke again. Tell me, what would you do differently next time? The male officer responded first. I'd slow down. I'd review the details again before approaching. I'd keep my mind open to the possibility that we might be wrong, his partner added. I'd talk more. Ask questions first. Try to understand the situation before assuming anything. And I'd check identification immediately instead of escalating right away. Alina smiled softly. Good. That's a start. The tension in the room softened, just slightly. I'm not angry with you, she said. But I need you to understand the seriousness of what happened. Not to scare you, but to prepare you. For the first time since entering the room, the rookies looked up not confidently, but openly. Alina could see the fear in their eyes shrinking, slowly replaced with determination. Sergeant Donovan cleared his throat. We'll include this in your record not as a punishment, but as part of your training. Something you'll review in the future? The rookies nodded again, accepting this without resistance. Alina leaned back slightly. I also want you both to attend the communication workshop next week. It'll help you learn how to approach situations with more clarity and less panic. Of course, the woman officer said immediately. We'll be there, her partner added. Alina nodded. Good. She paused, then said something unexpected, something that made both rookies blink. You're not bad officers. You just had a bad moment. What matters is what you do from now on. The male officer exhaled, relief written all over his face. The woman officer's eyes softened with gratitude. Donovan stepped forward. All right. Both of you are dismissed for now. Write up a report of the incident and submit it by the end of the day. The rookies nodded quickly. Yes, Sergeant. Yes, Captain. Thank you, they said before turning to leave. After the door closed behind them, the room fell quiet again. Donovan let out a breath. You handled that well. You always do. Lena shook her head lightly. They're young. They'll learn. I don't want one mistake to damage their confidence. You gave them the right kind of push, he replied. Not harsh. Not soft. Just steady. He paused. You know, the way a good leader should. Lena offered a small smile. I just want them to understand that this job is about more than following calls. It's about understanding people. Understanding themselves. Donovan nodded. And you taught them both today? He stepped toward the door. You want some time alone before the staff meeting? Alina nodded. Just a few minutes. I'll be there soon. When he left, Alina leaned back in her chair again. She closed her eyes, letting the silence surround her. The morning had begun with calm, dipped into tension, and now rested somewhere in between. She thought about the rookies, the fear in their voices, the regret in their eyes, the way they listened when she spoke. She hoped they understood the importance of what happened, not the embarrassment of mistaking their own captain, but the deeper truth that police work wasn't about acting fast, was about acting right. She hoped this would become a story they carried forward, one they told future rookies someday, a story that taught patience, clarity, and humility. Because some lessons didn't come from textbooks. They came from real moments that shook you awake. Moments like this. Alina opened her eyes again and looked toward the window. Outside, the sky was brightening. Cars moved steadily down the street. Life was continuing, unaware of the quiet shift that had taken place inside her office. She stood, grabbed her notebook, and smoothed her jacket. It was time for the meeting. Time to focus on the day ahead. But before she stepped out, she took one more slow breath. She wasn't shaken. She wasn't angry. She was simply grateful that the moment had ended safely, and grateful that the rookies had the kind of hearts that could learn from their mistakes. As she walked out of her office and into the busy hallway, she felt something settle inside. Something. Steady and certain. This wasn't just another morning. It was a reminder of why she did this work. A reminder of the power of patience. A reminder that calm could change everything. The sun had barely risen when the quiet neighborhood began to fill with the low hum of distant traffic. Life was going back to normal, or at least it seemed that way to those who didn't know what had happened. But for the woman at the center of everything, normal still felt out of reach. Even after proving who she really was and clearing up the mistake that had almost ruined her career, her mind felt heavy. She had always believed things happened for a reason, but she was still trying to understand what reason could possibly sit behind a day where fellow officers had nearly dragged her away like a criminal. She sat on her porch that morning with a warm cup of tea between her hands. The air was cool, and the sound of birds made the morning feel calm, almost peaceful. Anyone watching her would think she was relaxed, enjoying the start of a quiet day. But the truth was different. Inside, her thoughts were moving fast. She knew the department had already started its internal review. She knew there were questions she would have to answer. She knew there were meetings waiting for her. She knew there were mistakes that needed correcting. And she knew her presence as a high-ranking officer would not let the situation fade easily. Still, she took a breath and told herself that people made mistakes. What mattered was what they did after. She had always believed in fairness and accountability, and now she needed to show that belief clearly. Even if the experience had been humiliating, she wanted to be firm but not vengeful. She wanted to fix the problem, not punish those who had simply been following the wrong information before leaving home. She straightened her uniform slowly. Each movement was careful, almost symbolic. She wanted to walk into that building not as a frustrated person, not as someone who had been embarrassed, but as someone who still carried the responsibility of leadership. Once she was ready, she took one last breath and stepped outside. When she arrived at the station, the atmosphere changed slowly. Officers who usually greeted her with confidence now looked uneasy. Some lowered their eyes, unsure how to act. No one wanted to be the first to speak. They respected her, and they also knew what had happened. She didn't hold it against them. She offered a small nod as she walked by, letting them understand she wasn't here to start a battle. The first meeting of the day was with the two officers who had mistakenly tried to arrest her. They were already waiting in the small conference room when she entered. Both stood up quickly, nervous and uncertain. Their hands were clasped in front of them, and their eyes flicked between the table and her face. The older of the two began to speak, but his words came out uneven. He apologized repeatedly, saying he never intended to disrespect her, that he was only following the orders sent through the system. The younger officer said the same, and she could hear the fear in his voice. It's a kind of fear that came from the thought of losing a job. She listened calmly, then finally spoke. She told them she understood their position. They acted based on the information given, and in their shoes, she might have done the same. But she also reminded them, gently but firmly, that observing and assessing a situation was part of their duty. A badge didn't make someone above mistakes, but it also didn't make someone automatically guilty. There had been chances for them to slow down, question things, and check deeper. Those chances had been missed. The older officer nodded, ashamed. The younger one swallowed hard, but she continued speaking in the same level tone. She didn't want fear in the room. She wanted understanding. She told them that law enforcement required good judgment, and this experience should serve as a lesson, not a punishment. Not a stain, but a chance to grow. When they left the room, she could see the relief on their faces. not because they were avoiding consequences, but because they now knew they weren't being treated as enemies. She believed in fairness, and that small meeting helped set the tone for the rest of the day. Next came the internal review board. This was the part she had been preparing for mentally since the morning. The room was full senior staff, investigators, administrative officials. The air felt heavier here, not because of tension, but because everyone knew the seriousness of the process. They were here to figure out how such a mistake could have happened. She sat straight and answered every question clearly. She explained her side of the events, step by step, without exaggeration or emotion. She didn't hide her frustration, but she didn't let it guide her words. She knew the board needed the truth, not dramatic storytelling. Throughout the meeting, she remained steady, and her calmness grounded the room. They reviewed the broken communication chain, the outdated warrant entry, and the system that hadn't been updated in time. It became clear that the incident was not caused by a single person, but by several small errors piling on top of one another. The solution would not come from pointing at one person and blaming them. The solution had to come from repairing the process. Hours passed. People took notes, discussed, questioned, and clarified. By the end of the review, the recommendations were clear. There would be changes in the communication protocol. The outdated systems needed upgrading. Officers would start new training sessions focusing on verification steps for making an arrest related to questionable or unclear records. It was work that needed to be done anyway, but now, the urgency was impossible to ignore. She felt tired as she left the meeting room, but in a satisfying way. Progress had been made. Something good was coming out of the mess. As she walked through the halls later in the afternoon, more officers came up to her. Some apologized. Some thanked her for handling the situation calmly. Some admitted they would have been angry if they were in her place. She listened to them all. She didn't want anyone feeling afraid to talk to her or ashamed of being part of the department. She wanted everyone to feel like they could grow from the situation. Later that evening, when she returned home, she finally allowed herself to rest. She removed her uniform and sat again on her porch, the same place where her day had started, but this time her mind felt lighter. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft colors. The world outside looked peaceful again. She thought about everything: the mistake, the confusion, the embarrassment, the long meetings, the faces of the officers she had spoken to. Then she realized something important. The day had shown her that leadership wasn't only about giving orders or making big decisions. Sometimes leadership was about being the calmest person in the room when things went wrong. Sometimes it was about showing others how to handle difficult moments without letting anger or pride take over. She took a slow, deep breath and let the calmness settle in her chest. She knew tomorrow would bring more work. She knew the department still had changes to make. But for the first time since the incident, she finally felt at peace. She wasn't just the woman who was almost arrested by mistake. She was a captain who had faced an uncomfortable moment and turned it into a chance for improvement for herself, for her team, and for the whole department. In the end, the story wasn't about what went wrong. It was about what they all chose to do next. And that part, she believed, was where true strength lived.